Thanks for staying up later. Charlie Sheen is with us. His new film, The Rookie, with Raul Julia and, of course, Clint Eastwood, opens around the country tomorrow. Has Clint Eastwood really been, as I read somewhere, an idol of yours, and now you get a chance to work with him in this film?
Yeah. As a child and throughout my teenage years, he was always somebody that I admired, you know, who had this certain screen persona that was just about pure grit, you know, and to have the opportunity to work with him, you know, before I had met him, was a mixture of insecurity, of fear, well, terror actually, and excitement, you know.
Yeah, there's an underlying sense of humor in all the action films he does.
Oh yeah. Well, he doesn't take himself that seriously, you know, and I think that was good for our show because, you know, and I picked up on that from him in that, you know, in this large of an action film, you know, if you can sort of let the audience know that you're aware of the insanity of these situations, you know, and that you're not really believing them completely, you know, but you have to, you know, you have to smirk occasionally, you know.
This is an obvious one, but it can't go unasked. It's about the background with your family. Father Martin Sheen and your brothers Emilio and Ramon, and there's a sister who's...
Yeah, my sister Renee.
Who's an actress.
Yeah.
To what extent, you've been in films together, but to what extent on a day-by-day basis do you critique one another, help one another, or is it all kind of separate paths that just converge occasionally?
We've always had a very tight-knit unit, very much firm believers in the family foundation, you know, where family is always first, you know, and as the years have gone on, you know, somebody will always be off somewhere working, and it's very tough to get the whole gang back together. But when we do find ourselves under one roof at the same time, the last thing we usually talk about is film.
What's your earliest recollection of being around film as a kid? Not necessarily as an actor, but having some sense of what your father did and some sense that it was attractive to you.
I think it was age 9. There's other memories, but they're not quite as clear as this particular one. It was the execution of Private Slovak, a TV movie that my dad did, and I was on the set one day, and you know, I was always kind of a quiet, observing child, you know, and in watching Dad in the middle of this particular scene, this wedding scene, there was a sense of great control, you know, of great energy, you know, a sense of just, he was in touch with something, and I couldn't put my finger on it, but I knew that there was something magic about it, you know. And then they had asked me later on the same day if I would do a little walk-by at the wedding. There were no kids in the show, and they figured they should have a kid there. And I got like a 12-second close-up out of it, you know, and I can remember to this day the adrenaline rush, the nerves that I had just walking in front of the camera. You know, it was terrifying. And so I had that to kind of compare against how I saw my dad behave in a similar situation.
Couldn't have been too long after that, maybe just a year or two, that Apocalypse Now came out.
It was, yeah, it was roughly, I went to the Philippines when I was 10, had my 11th birthday there. Well, they shot it from 76 to 7, it came out in 79.
How much, you were only 10 or 11, but obviously you had a pretty good sense, for a child of that age, having grown up around it, a pretty good sense of film and a sense of stardom, and now a Francis Ford Coppola is right there in front of you, a Bob Duvall, a Marlon Brando, your dad is there. What did you take away from that?
It was a strange time. The whole family was there in the Philippines, and it wasn't so much about being starstruck by these particular people, because at that age, you know, you sense who they are, but you don't, you know, you haven't really grasped what they're about, and it was more or less the size of the production itself and the length. You know, I kept asking my dad, isn't this a little long for a film to take? You know, he spent 16 months on that film, and I was there for 8 of them in the Philippines, and it was really, you know, for a kid to come to that set, to go to Kurtz's compound and watch him blow the entire thing up, it was a lot to take in. It was very, very visual, you know, but it wasn't something that I couldn't see myself doing. You know, if anything, watching what my father went through on that film, and it almost killed him. He had a heart attack. You know, it would have put me off from film. You know.
But it didn't.
It didn't. No. No. Baseball stepped up for a while. I thought I had some semblance of a career, but it didn't pan out.
You were a pretty good high school pitcher, weren't you?
Well, yeah, pitcher and a shortstop. I was decent. I had no stick, no glove, but I could throw pretty good, you know. And I used to go to a baseball camp at the Mickey Owen Baseball School in Springfield, Missouri, you know. And I went there for 4 summers, and I got scouted my final summer by the University of Kansas, you know. And so I went back, and my senior year was just it was a debacle. It was a complete blowout. I didn't graduate in time. I couldn't accept the scholarship. So at that point, it dawned on me, you know, realistically, it was time to hang up the cleats, you know, which is a tough reality to accept.
Platoon is where you, in a sense, came full circle, because you were talking about being a 10 or 11-year-old kid in the Philippines, watching your dad work on Apocalypse Now. Then you go back to the Philippines to shoot Platoon 10 years later. Yeah,
that was an interesting time of growth for me. I was 20 going back to the Philippines, and I can remember stepping off the airplane with Johnny Depp, who had a small part in the film, and we were coming up the tarmac, and I had to stop because there was a certain smell in the air, a certain feel, a vibe that hadn't changed at all. And an entire decade had gone by, and my life was where it was then, but the place was exactly the same, and it was really heavy, you know. And to go back to do a Vietnam film and narrate it, the parallels with Apocalypse, it was, you know, you'd win the lottery before you assume that would happen, you know.
Willem Dafoe was here a couple of years ago, and he was telling me about the rigorous training you guys went through. And he said, as I'm sure you would, that he wasn't trying to equate it to anything like the actual preparation for war. Right. But for actors, it was pretty rigorous and pretty realistic.
Yeah, it was it was nothing. I'd gone through nothing like that before or since. I think Oliver just really wanted to make us feel as close as we could to what they went through. I would have been fine with just the heat factor. You know, I kind of got a sense of what the climate was about. But yeah, it was living in the foxholes for 2 weeks, and you're only addressed by your character name, and just playing those characters before we actually started shooting. And we went directly the night we graduated training camp on camera the following day.
Who conducted the training camp?
Captain Dale Dye, who was a retired USMC captain, and he's in all the military people I've met in my life, he's about as well-rounded and skilled and intelligent with the military as it gets.
So he had you carrying the heavy packs on your back and digging foxholes?
Everything, yeah. In fact, during the shoot, I had replaced the rocks and tree stumps in my backpack with foam. You know, because no one's going to know, I figured, and word got back to him, and he wasn't really happy about that. He quickly put them back, you know.
You were the guy who at least loosely represented Oliver Stone himself, Stone being the director, and you're pretty much representing his experience years before in Vietnam. Therefore, was there a closer relationship between you and Stone, and did you feel even more responsibility than the others?
Yes, I did. I felt that I had a little more responsibility, you know, because if I'm not mistaken, the characters everybody else was playing were either had gone AWOL somewhere across the planet or were dead. And so, you know, having the guy that I'm essentially supposed to be, you know, 10 feet away at all times, I felt like I didn't have as much free rein to try things or to screw up or whatever I had to do. But there were times when I would see him off in that place, you know, and I think from watching me go through the show, I think he was definitely right back, and you had to snap him out of it sometimes, you know, Oliver, you know, and but yeah, I think the responsibility was a little more heightened for the Taylor character, you know.
For a guy who's just 25, you've been in not only a lot of successful films, but you've been able to hit a lot of different notes up and down the scale pretty early in your career. You've had a wide variety of roles.
Yeah, I've been fortunate in that, you know, in that it would be a drag to work in a medium that warrants a lot of versatility and not be able to explore that, you know. Whereas if you get on a TV series or a soap opera or whatever, you know, same guy every week. But I've just been trusted by various directors and studios and whoever to try different things, to take different risks, and you know, hopefully it's paid off, you know.
I'm something that you never understand. I'll never beat you, I'll never lie. And if you're evil, I'll forgive you, bye-bye. 'Cause I will die for you.
It's an obvious fact that most people who have starred in baseball movies didn't play baseball very well, and that makes the exceptions stand out and be appreciated by baseball fans all the more. Costner could play some baseball, and it really helped in Bull Durham.
Sure.
You can throw a little bit, and so as Rick Vaughn, the Wild Thing, you didn't look like some guy shot putting the ball up the home plate. You look like a guy who might belong there.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I actually worked out a lot before the film, and about 6 or 8 weeks, Steve Yeager helped me and got together with me and Berenger. I've always had good mechanics as a pitcher, but you know, the hardest I'd ever thrown was mid to high 70s, you know. So we cranked that up a little bit through weight training and whatever else to get up to about 83, 84. And I felt if I could give him that, you know, we could make it look with various camera angles like 95, 96, you know. I mean, and people ask me, they meet me in the street and they say, hey man, can you throw 100 miles an hour? I'm like, pal, if I could throw 100 miles an hour, I'd still be playing ball, you know. I mean, it's like ridiculous. But no, that's nice to hear. George Scott, who's a very good friend of my dad's, passed on a very high compliment through my father to give to me about that he thought that my baseball abilities were the best he'd seen in a baseball film in like the last 20 years. Which, you know, coming from George Scott was no small potatoes, you know.
From the windup, swung on and missed.
In some capacity, I've taken part in Major League Baseball, you know, even though it's fiction. But, you know, you're out there, and for Major League, we had close to 40,000 extras one night at Milwaukee County Stadium. And that felt like, you know, it felt like the real deal.
But that was an unbelievable scene in Major League. It had to be an adrenaline rush. Like you said, there's 40,000 extras. It's supposedly the Cleveland Indians, but they shot at a county stadium in Milwaukee.
Yeah.
And when he comes out of the bullpen and they start playing the Troggs Wild Thing and the place is going crazy, it's a great scene.
Well, yeah, thank you. It didn't feel as, that particular thing didn't feel as adrenal at the time, but seeing it with an audience, it was kind of, you know, it was inspiring.
What are your recollections or the biggest impressions you took away from your work on Wall Street?
I thought there were certain areas, certain moments that I could have been a little more, or a lot more focused with, certain performance choices that I'd make differently now, which is a sign of growth, I think. It's just, working here in the city, it just, things got weird.
Well, there was talk that your behavior wasn't what it should have been all the time. Was that fair?
Yeah, that's extremely fair. I just, you know, I was on this high. I was on this you know, Platoon had won Best Picture, I think a week before we started shooting, you know, and I felt like I was you know, a part of a championship team. Not the MVP, but a definite, you know, integral role. And I just, the priorities weren't exactly in order at the time, you know.
In Wall Street, your father played a very idealistic, blue-collar guy, and eventually he faces you down as you've gone off the track and you're into the fast lane, and you're quickly casting aside every value that he hopes that he's instilled in you. Were you able to play that, just actor to actor, or was there, at some level, at every moment as you looked into his eyes, this is my father talking to me as my screen father?
Yeah, well, I think we were able to play it, but I think the metaphors and the parallels that were existing, you know, based on what the scene was about and what the situation behind the scenes were about, I wasn't hep to. I didn't really see that until, you know, looking back on it. But there's an asset to being able to look into your father's eyes, and he's playing your father, and there's a history there that you can't deny that you bring to the screen. But I think the detriment can be too familiar, you know. It's too close, too, I don't know, there's too much history there at some times, you know.
I don't mean this to blow smoke your way, but it seems to me, just sitting here for half an hour, that you're a pretty thoughtful guy and you're given to some reflection. So what kind of terms have you come to with your past reputation as a wild liver, as an irresponsible guy? Now, granted, you're only 25 years old, so that stuff happened in your late teens, early 20s, but when you're as famous as you had become by that time, a lot of that information gets out to a lot of people.
Yeah, it's under the microscope, you know. Well, I think I've arrived, or I'm arriving at a good place with that. In retrospect, you know, I'm a firm believer in you know, having to appreciate the night, to appreciate the day, you know, and it's almost like a lot of that stuff had to happen for a reason, or I chose to allow it to happen for a reason. But if I dwell on it, I can bury myself, you know. You know, it's a wise man that learns from the mistakes of others, you know. And that's kind of where I'm directing myself, you know. So thank God I'm still alive, you know.
You feel lucky to come out, relatively speaking, unscathed? You're still held in high regard. You can get a lot of work. You're 25 years old. You're healthy.
Extremely lucky. Extremely lucky, yeah. Yeah, and very thankful to God or a higher power, or whatever interpretation you want to give it. Yeah, I've become a lot more spiritual these days, you know.
So you think you've entered, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but do you think you've entered a whole new phase rather than just the thing evolving away from that? Is there a line of demarcation and you can say all that stuff is behind you and now you're into a new phase?
It feels like it, yeah. Yeah, it feels like it. I just, I wasn't thinking about the future that much back then, you know, and I would always give these interviews and talk about longevity and I'm here for the long haul and all that, and then, you know, complete hypocrisy in my actions, you know. Yeah, it feels like I've drawn a line, but I have to remind myself that that, you know, it's always going to be there to step back over, you know, and that's, I think, that's maturity. That's when you realize that you do have the choice, you know.
Opening tomorrow around the country, The Rookie, Clint Eastwood, Raul Julia, and this man, Charlie Sheen. I enjoyed it. Thanks for coming by.
Thanks.
Okay.
All right.
See you later.